show of hands, who hasn't heard of MapQuest? All you, come on. Right? Look around, by the way, if you're under like 28, you've never heard of MapQuest. All right, all the old people, who's heard of Rand McNally? Think of the juxtaposition, that's a hard word to say, between those two things, right? What do you think about this space? Feel kind of cool? Maybe a place you'd like to hang out? We'll talk about that. I'm just going to do about 5 minutes, give you a little bit about my history, and then we're going to ask questions, so be prepared. If you don't ask questions, then I'll call on you and force you to ask a question. Is that fair? Okay, so start thinking. Oh shit, please don't make me be the first. I'm an 84 alum in, do you know any idea what degree I had? Geography. I remember my dad's face when I told him I was going to be a geography major. It was very disappointing. Son, what the heck are you going to do with that? Turns out in 1984 I came down here for a graduate degree because this is one of only 3 places in the United States that taught a computer mapping program. University of South Carolina. One of 3 places. And it was a lot warmer than Philadelphia. How many know how to write code? How many want to learn how to write code? Yeah. It's a pretty often, kind of a thing, a skill. It's almost like learning a foreign language today. But what I'll tell you is that in 1981 and 2, I actually, as a geography major undergraduate, learned how to write code. So, by the way, if you want to start a big company, figure out how to jam 2 things together that have never been jammed together before. In my case, it was computers and mapping. By the way, speaking of computers, we're holding anybody know, who knows what AWS is? What's AWS? Amazon's cloud service. So this is the little Amazon meetup that's behind us. So they're going to be fully geeking out tonight. We'll tell you about the space. Obviously, MapQuest came a little later. We launched it in February of '96. It was one of the first internet mapping companies. What you use Google Maps for today, we were 9 years before that. First person to do mapping online, give you directions, and that was so special that AOL, I know I'm sorry to say AOL, but AOL, which was the big dog at the time, bought us for $1.2 billion. Not a bad exit. Anybody sign up for $1 billion exit? Yeah, I'll take one of those or 2, thanks. So I was in the mapping industry for about 15 years. Did it in the US government after my graduate degree here at the US State Department, ran a mapping program there, joined a private cartography firm in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, home of 50,000 Amish people, what we call the Silicon Valley of South Central Pennsylvania. Not really, no one says that, but it sounds funny, doesn't it? Thanks for laughing at all the right times so far. Just a little louder. See, it's a little bit of training. Went on to be the president of Rand McNally, so for all the old people out there, lots of maps, road atlases. So a road atlas, you guys, is a piece of paper, it's a book. Has all the states in it. If you don't really know what it is or what a paper map looks like, what I want you to do when next time you're home, I want to get in the back seat of your dad's car. And behind the driver will be that little pouch, right? Put your hand in there, and you're gonna find a bunch of paper maps, guaranteed. Y'all in on this? Then like tweet out, like, oh my God, this guy Heivly said there's paper maps. I just found a treasure trove in my dad's car. What was cool about the MapQuest experience is I learned how to kind of start and build companies. And then the last 10, 12 years, I've just been helping entrepreneurs through running incubator-like programs, helping places like this set up an environment where if you're interested in starting a company, you need to hang around with other people who are starting companies. And written a couple books on it. Didn't someone, who wrote? You got a book. How is it so far? Yeah. It's really, they'll say that louder so they can all hear you. It's really good. Is it hard to read?
It's kind of frustrating. We write it in front of you and answer all the questions I have that I was asking.
Right. What you're supposed to say is it's a really easy read, and I really enjoyed it, and I learned a few things. He's going to buy it twice. That's how much. That's an endorsement. So, have you guys warmed up so far? Guys, it's generic, folks. So, who would like to ask a question? What are you curious about in any parts of my journey? Yes, sir.
How does regulation impact a company like MapQuest?
There's no regulation whatsoever.
Have you crossed into places where you have face tags?
Yeah, in fact, as an investor, I love companies. So, how many people have maybe a little idea for a company? Okay, listen, if you're doing it, you got to be like loud and proud, right? So, what I'll tell you, thank you, Ali. So what I love as an investor, if you have to both convince a market or a set of customers that your idea, that they have a problem, and then convince them that your solution fixes the problem, now that's twice as hard as it should be. What I like about some regulations is they force companies to do things, and now, so I don't have to worry about convincing them they have the problem, or the problem's big enough, and then I can just focus on, is this the best solution for it? And a perfect example of this is, most of you can imagine that like universities and governments, they have to archive all the email from staff. It's a requirement, it's a regulation. Well, at one stage, probably 8 to 10 years ago, with all the social media, there was no one archiving social media for governments, institutions. So we invested in a company that did that. I love that regulation that forces them to do something. Now I just have to convince them that I'm the best. Does that make sense? But sometimes, I wouldn't want to be like in like drug discovery or something, or pharma. That's so much bureaucracy and regulations. But not a bad first question. All right. What else? Yes, sir.
You said you started MapQuest in '96, is that right?
Ish.
Yes. So what was like the process before that, building up to it, and I guess what was the breakthrough?
Thank you for asking that question, because I get to tell you the bigger story. And it's really a lesson in entrepreneurship that I've kind of brought forward with me in general. So I told you I was a geography major, undergraduate, graduate degree down here. I told you that I learned how to write code. So Professor David Cowan, who ran one of the big computer labs and was at in the geography department, said, great, you're here. You told me you know how to write code? Yeah, so here's an Apple Lisa and a new thing called an IBM, desktop computer. Make them draw maps. It was like toys. It was fantastic. I tell you that story to say that would have been 82, 83, 84, somewhere in there. But I told you that we released MapQuest in '96. So the question is, what happens for 12 years? And this is really a lesson in the way that good entrepreneurs, either by luck or by skill, get to successful exits. Is that, in my opinion, you start with something small. So in 1990, this is going to be one of these old people moments for a second. So, sorry, I said old people, and now I'm going to ask you a question. What did you or your parents do when you went on a road trip? You got a triptych. How many people know what a triptych is? Watch all the young people. Okay, so a triptych, thank you, James. So a triptych was a pre-canned set of directions from AAA that you were a member of, and you asked them, you said you're going to go from Columbia, South Carolina down to Orlando to go to Disney World with the station wagon and then the road atlas, and they gave you the directions in these little like 4-inch by 9-inch. And we just looked at that and said, that looks really stupid. We should be able to do that on the fly. And so we built a system. Remember, this is 89 or 90, and we put it on preloaded all the maps and all the data to do those directions, all the hotels, things of interest. And we put that on a computer and we rolled that into every AAA office, as well as 14 other auto clubs that had this service and was paying too much for it. And we had this brand new thing, guys, called a laser printer. It cost $10,000, no lie. And it printed 2 colors, black and white. $10,000. So anyhow, we sold to every auto club. We were doing about $4 million in sales. Not bad, but like, okay, what else are you gonna do? Anybody know, on the older side, what happens around 1993 to your desktop computer? Anybody remember this time? Joey? Yeah, that's you. All of a sudden, the desktop computer comes with a CD-ROM, which has 10 times or 20 times the storage that we had before. And now, instead of you going to your auto club, now you can do it at your home, right? We had the little trip planner. We sold that at computer stores, believe it or not. And you did that, and you could do it at home. So you could do it the night before because you waited too late. You didn't have to rely on the auto club. And then the next thing, though, we started looking at the internet. The first time I saw the internet was here in Columbia, South Carolina. I went into Dave Cowan's lab 10 years after I graduated, keeping in touch, staying connected. He said, have you heard about the internet? I don't know what you're talking about. So a couple years later, we took the CD-ROM, we put it on the internet. So what's the story there? The story is MapQuest didn't start in 96 or January. Really the story starts about 1989 or 90, when we decided that we could find a better way of doing triptychs or driving directions differently than what was happening before. And then we just followed the technology. And what I'm going to tell you, if you're going to be a successful entrepreneur, and I hope that all of you that want to be one are one, it's typically a series of steps. And where you end up is not usually where you started. It's because of technology, because of your market, because of lots of factors. And your ability to kind of spot things and traverse things and say, let's try that next. We were in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. 50-some thousand Amish people. I mean, still in horse and buggies. Not a lot of internet people in 1996, but we just figured it out. We just figured it out. Thanks for that short question and really long-winded answer. Right now, all the old people are going, triptychs. I haven't heard that word in a long time. Next question. By the way, I will call on you. Yes, Rory.
So on your blog, you said that did see the reshape startup community. Can you talk a little bit about this and tell us what's different about this generation?
There's nothing different about this generation. We love all the generations equally. Don't we, boomers? Listen, everyone's wired differently, but let me use that as an excuse to talk about this space. So what I've done for the last 10 years is go around the world and help cities, universities, government, investors, people, other entrepreneurs who want to see a stronger community, a startup community, prosper. Turns out, by the way, the best entrepreneurs engage with their local community, and that's what makes them hopefully make better, smarter decisions. And there was a group of people here who wanted that to happen here. And I had done this as a consultant for 5 years in my town of Raleigh-Durham for about 10 years. And I have a soft spot for this place, so even in my retirement, I said I'll come down and help. What I'm going to tell you is that a place like this is really important as a destination. If you have an inkling of saying, I think I want to start a company, you should reach out to other people and say, tell me what your experience is. What are the things I need to know? What are the things I don't know? Sitting in your garage or your basement or your third room in your house and doing this by yourself, you might be able to be brilliant, but I'm looking at you, probably not. Including me. For the rest of us mere mortals, you have to rely on a set of people who've done this together. And there are people in this town that have done this, right? And relying on them. But we need a common place to meet, to gather, to, share and be a little vulnerable. So this is called the Boyd Innovation Center. It's funded by the Boyd family, also does Boyd Plaza, the zoo thing, and the island thing, and a bunch of stuff, right? Good people. And we said, we need some help getting this started. We have a Wednesday coffee, 8 to 9, free coffee, hang out, show up, don't show up, but I would show up, meet some people. Probably, by the way, if you're interested in a job, you could probably find an internship or a job from companies that come here. And this is just a way of jamming people together. And so, to answer your question about Gen Z, we all roll different, right? The things that are important to you are different than the things important to me. What I want to do is create environments where you get what you need as easily and frictionlessly as possible. And so that's the cool part about spaces like this. And so, you want to come hang out here, talk to Caroline. She's back in the back. She's our executive director of GrowCo. She runs this center. It's only been open since August. This is the place for you guys to come hang out. Probably get a job, maybe launch a company, maybe help someone else launch a company. That's the way this stuff works. Yes, sir.
Hey, Chris, will you talk about what purposely cultivating founders in Durham has meant to that community?
Oh my God. Anybody ever been to Durham? How about like more than 10 years ago? What would you call it?
Rough.
Rough. That was very diplomatic. Yeah. It was pretty crappy. About a third of the buildings were empty. I mean, it was decline. Old tobacco warehouses and textile mills, and just everyone had left. By the way, a perfect opening for entrepreneurs building companies needing cheap, shitty space. And so we gravitated to Durham. And anybody been in the last year? It's miraculous turnaround, isn't it? Because you raised your hand like pre-10 years and now, right?
Yeah, I've lived in Raleigh for 20 years, so I've been, I was actually a Deepak, right, so.
Yeah. Deepak's Performing Arts Center, which didn't even exist probably 8 to 10 years ago. So the startup community, I think, started bringing, let's face it, most entrepreneurs are on the younger side. We appreciate art and music and all the creative things. So Durham became a creative hub, which included startups. So to fast forward, we had a real estate partner, not unlike the real estate partner that we're working here, who built out the first space for us. We paid a little bit of rent, cheap rent to get in. That's called the American Underground. That space for entrepreneurs is now over 100,000 square feet and 1,000 entrepreneurs a day. Not just all, founders, some of them are the companies, or the employees of those companies as they start to grow. 1,000 people a day walk through those doors. You want to talk about density in a hub? And now, gosh, I was there yesterday. I hadn't been really for a while, and there's cranes everywhere, new apartment buildings. It's completely re-energized the whole place. So that's what a healthy startup community does for a city. And I think every city of any reasonable size, 100,000 people and above, better have a bunch of people working to build a community, or you're in deep doo-doo. That's a technical term. Yes, sir.
What's a mistake that you made as an entrepreneur that taught you a lesson that changed the way you do business?
Everyone hear the question, or I can repeat it? Or you can stand up and really project it. Go for it.
What's a mistake that you've made as an entrepreneur that taught you a lesson that changed the way that you do business?
So like a good politician, I'm going to answer a slightly different question. The question is, are there anything I regret about my entrepreneurial journey? In a similar vein. And what I'll tell you is that spending way too much time building my product or service and not spending enough time getting to know who my potential customers are and developing those customers, bringing them into my product and service before I'm ready so that they can hopefully, influence the product I end up making. So the biggest lesson in starting a company is this. You're probably going to fail, and when you fail, you're going to fail because you ran out of time or money. So your job is to try to be as efficient as possible with your time and money. And one of those things is get your customer involved earlier. My regret is not, even when I parachuted into bigger companies, not spending enough time with my customers. Because I love to build stuff. I'm a builder, which most of us as entrepreneurs are builders. Does that resonate with you? Is that something to take back to the IROC? Good. Yes, ma'am.
Who would you say you relied on when you were starting out, or when you first got the idea? How did you form your team?
So in some ways, the team was already there. We had a group of about 75 people in this paper map company. And I started going like, I think we could do this computer thing. And so it was getting some buy-in from some others, like, what do we think about that? And when I look back on it, we were very supportive. Like, we weren't like, there's no infighting, no like, you make all the decisions or I make, none of that kind of crap you sometimes see in business. We were all kind of pretty passionate about this stuff. We're like, oh, this is cool. Hey, let me do this part and I'll do this part. It's very much a collaborative sharing. So what's your name? Hannah. Hi, Hannah. So let me, I wrote a couple books. Ali has one of them that I signed, which always makes an author feel pretty cool, by the way. And it's called Build the Fort. So quickly, how many of you built forts as a kid? And keep your hand up, and then look around. Like, it's pretty much everyone. And I'm talking about like the inside with the chair on the couch, upside down, the blanket and the broom handle, and also the outdoor ones that I built with like wood, right? And when I look back on my career and I wanted to write a book called Build a Fort, what I'm good at, Hannah, is making things simple for other people to understand. And in that way, there's 5 things I think I learned in building a fort. One is, we share the idea without any fear and vision. What's your name? LJ. It's a summer day, we're like 12 years old. LJ, you want to build a fort?
Sure.
Right, it took him about a nanosecond to say yes. Let me do the adult version of that. Hey LJ, I got this idea for a company. Do you want to quit school and start? Okay, so, right, that's the thing we do. So we decide all the reasons why we can't before we kind of do. So one is we share the idea pretty freely. Second is, while we're doing that, we invariably find some people that want to do it with us, right? So I do think that entrepreneurship is most of the time better served as a team sport than a solo sport. The third thing is we gather the things that are closest to you. So did you build forts? Were they outside forts?
They were inside.
Inside. Who built an outside fort? What's your name? Ben. What is the first thing you do? Building an outside fort.
Supplies.
Got the supplies. Where'd you go for the supplies? Did you call up Amazon and buy the fort building kit? You went to the creek. I'm from Philly, we called it a crick, but go ahead. Trees. One of the things we did in this one specific fort that I write about in the book is they were building a house up in the cul-de-sac, and it turns out at 5 o'clock there's all this free wood that they weren't using. My point of that is, you find the assets to get this thing started that are like within arm's reach. Like we didn't have, like back then we didn't have 2 cars, I didn't have Amazon to build the kit, right? It's whatever you could like carry or fit on your bicycle, right? The fourth thing is, you keep the scope small. Now, Ben, when you built that fort, how many days would you take to build a fort? Maybe a week, probably like 2 to 3 days. Any longer, what happens? We get bored, right? So one of the problems with startups and being an entrepreneur is we have this vision of where this thing is out like 5 to 8 years from now. And though that's great to have that vision, but how do you start today? Like our forts didn't have bathrooms or kitchens, right? It's just like kind of get a roof, kind of have a couple walls, and you start there. And maybe you kind of iterate and experiment from there. See how this relates back to the MapQuest story, right? Triptychs, CD-ROMs, internet. So don't be afraid to evolve, but start small and get some momentum. And the 5th lesson is just do it, don't ask for permission, or don't wait for permission. All right, in the back there, somebody is jonesing to ask a question. Yes, sir.
Would you pay an advisor upfront or otherwise for access to their network?
No, never. And if they ask you, then tell them to go jump in a creek. What's your name?
Adam.
Adam. The whole idea of building a community is to have access to those people who are willing to expose their networks, who share their stories and their journey with you so that you can make better decisions. That's another example of what we're trying to build here, right? We use a product called Mentor Deck. We probably have 30, 50 people on there or higher. And so you come into here, you talk to Caroline, she's like, hey, go on the website, go on Mentor Deck and find a mentor that's already agreed to help you without paying. You should never pay for advice at the early stage. Maybe when you're exiting, you got to pay lawyers and stuff like that. That's a good problem to have, but not when you're starting out. And if someone doesn't agree with that, just introduce them to me. Yes, sir.
Your career as an investor, as an advisor, how do you recognize potential startups?
Question was, how do I as an investor, how do I recognize potential startups? So the way that most people ask the question, which I believe is the wrong way to ask it, is this: how much is it do you rely on the person or the team, and how much is it the idea and the market, right? Does that sound like a question? And I say, for me, it's not like 60% team and 42%, I did the math just to be funny, but I don't do it like that. I see it as a series of gates. The first thing I want to know as an entrepreneur are, do you have the right mindset? And if you don't, are you curious enough to learn a new mindset about, not that there's like a recipe for how you do this, but it's kind of like, there's kind of a mindset about how you go approach this. That you need to be curious. You need to understand that there's a series of experiments and iterations, that you're in a process of discovery. You're trying to figure out whether you have a market, whether your product fits that, and if not, making adjustments. If you pass that test, then I'll start to talk to you about the idea and how you're going to prove out that this idea is good. Because they're all brilliant ideas when it's only you. I used to say, when you're the only one in the room and you look in the mirror, every decision is perfect. So we got to go prove outside of you that your thesis of your idea is correct. So that's how I kind of judge that. Good question. A couple of you promised to ask questions, and so I'm looking at you right now. Yes, ma'am.
So whether you're in entrepreneurship or you're working like already established business, there's a tendency to sort of focus on yourself and how you can improve yourself. But you talked about earlier how you can focus more on the customer and their needs. What advice do you have for people to change their mindset from how do I succeed and how do I add value to my customer?
Yeah, that's a really good question. How do did you hear most of it? Do you mind? I know it's like a couple layers, but we're coming over.
My question was, whether you're in entrepreneurship or just starting a business, you tend to focus on yourself and how you can improve your own performance. And you talked about how it's important to develop the mindset of focusing on the customer and what they need. So how do you shift your mindset from a self-focused performance base to how can I add value to my customer?
I told you it was a good question, and you can see why I couldn't repeat it. Well, like a lot of things, both can be true, right? And I think the problem or the challenge of entrepreneurship is there's typically 30, 40 different things you got to do simultaneously, and some of them are important and some are not important, right? And some of them you got to figure out. I was telling someone today, is Damien here? Hello, Damien. I was telling him today, I think it was you, Damien, I don't know. I remember my son coming in while I was doing a startup once. He was probably 13 or 14, and he said, by the way, this is like a Wedding Crashers reference. He's like, what are you doing there? And like every day in your office. I mean, get the reference, more meatloaf, whatever. So, so I said, son, here's the deal. Like, there's 100 things I could do for my company today. Every day, I try to write down the 10 most important things. And if I'm lucky, I'll get done 2 or 3 of them. Now, here's the deal. Tomorrow, it's a completely new list half the time because shit changed. I think that's part of the mindset. So, you have to learn how to be comfortable in that environment. At the same time, I'm 64. I tell people I have the energy of a 40-year-old and a 40-year-old and a sense of humor of a 12-year-old, obviously with the wedding crashing, reference. What I say at 64, what have I learned? I learned that I'm still learning stuff. I'm learning that, I still have things I understand because the world keeps changing. So I got to have that kind of mindset that I don't know everything. In fact, I hardly know anything. I need to rely on my community to get smarter. If I ask enough people their opinions, if I can leverage their experiences, maybe, just maybe, I'll make a few extra better decisions than not, and that'll help me. And oh, by the way, if I can surround myself with a team who thinks like that, who understands that collectively that together makes for a great potential company, boy, that's a nice recipe for potential success. This true story in Raleigh-Durham when we started our kind of investment incubator, and we just take lots of meetings. And so this probably 22-year-old kid comes in with his mom to sit with my partner and I. And he had an idea for a baseball hitting training video thing. He had spent $400,000 of his mom's IRA. I mean, she agreed to it. I just got chills thinking about this. He had never showed this to anybody. Now that's an extreme example of not bringing your customer into your, he'd never shown it to anybody. And she was like, what do I do? I mean, I almost cried. Like, I didn't even know how to talk. Luckily, my partner was smarter and he could say, that's bad, you know. You get the gist here? Like, why did he do that? Why did he stay in his garage? Why did she, I know she loved him, but I hope that IRA was a lot bigger. That's all I hope today.
What were your gut punches when you started? What were the hardest things you faced?
What were my gut punches? The hardest thing I faced? Geez, so many. Which one do I want to choose? The biggest thing is doubt and fear. Like, I don't care how successful you may or may not be, and I know you've had a couple businesses you built, but like, I still have, by the way, we all have, just in case you think you're the only one, that little voice in your head that says like, why do you think that's going to work? Like, that's the dumbest thing I ever heard. That's our kind of dinosaur brain just trying to protect us, you know, from stuff. And ultimately at the base is a fear. Am I going to be embarrassed? Is this going to be stupid? Am I going to fail? Will I lose money? Whatever those drivers are. And so I still have that today. So I was telling Ali, so I've written 2 business books, but I'm thinking of writing a novel. I have an idea of a story. By the way, I failed freshman English in college. I was told for many years I couldn't write. I got down here to graduate school, and you know, grad school, it's all about writing papers. And I had my first assignment, and I went to the professor who became a good friend afterwards, and I said, I don't know how to write. So with that in mind, here I am 40 some years later, going, I think I'm going to write a novel. I am scared shitless. I'm like, this is going to be stupid. And I've kind of been sketching it, but I haven't crossed that point to do it. It's fear. Right now I'm processing this and doing my own therapy in my head, literally as we speak. I'm like, what am I afraid of? I don't know. So I think the gut punches are those moments when you're like, why do you think you can do this? By the way, I think there's typically 3 ways you handle fear. One is you try to bury it. Never seen that work long term. The second is you try to logicize, you know, use logic and, you know, convince yourself that you know, I think that's kind of sometimes works. I think the biggest thing you need to do is to understand that this isn't like a normal part of your brain. It's this protective part that's just trying to save you from something, like the dinosaur eating you. And for me, when I get to that point, I just start laughing. Like, oh, I'm not going to slay you, fear. I'm going to discount you. This is just being silly. So, anyway, how's that for good stuff? Yes, sir. Ben, my best friend from way back.
So when you're answering her question, you're talking about this list of 100 things you have to do.
You could do.
You could do.
Because you can't do all of them, right? So, the trap is thinking you have to do all these 100 things, which is why people do these like burnout hours, And I go like, it didn't work. Well, you can't, there are probably a better 20, 80 of them probably I shouldn't do at this point. Did I just answer your question? Sorry.
So my question was, how do you decide this is something I need to do, whereas this is something I need to delegate or hire someone for?
Yeah, well, if you don't have money, then you can't hire someone. But maybe you can barter for it, help them do something, they could do something for you. Usually that's tech help, because most of us typically not, at least in my day, they weren't coders, developers. I still do a lot of bartering. Let me, you help me, I'll help you, and if I could, both of us win, that's fantastic. I think one of the things, by the way, as a new entrepreneur, whatever the core of your business is going to be, whatever the secret sauce, the thing that is, I don't think you should try to farm that out. Like, you have to own that part. Whether it's that you're going to market differently from anybody else, you're going to use Instagram like no one else has, or you're going to develop a piece of code or a service, and like whatever the core, most important part of your business, I think typically you have to own that. And not farm that. And if you can't figure it out, you need to find people that you can bring in to help you do that. But you got to be integrally part of that. As an example, if you're a more technical savvy person and you don't feel comfortable in sales, like maybe the first couple you have to learn how to go sell. Like, you are going to be the one who understands more about why and how this thing. Now, as you start to scale it, maybe you can start to farm that out. If you can't stand being in front of people, then maybe you ought to find someone who can. So a lot of it's looking inside. I think awareness is one of the biggest things you learn as you go forward. That look in the mirror part where you understand, what do you think, Brad? Like, understanding, I'm good at this, I'm not very good at that, I better.
Understanding weaknesses is important.
Yeah, and being honest about that. Yeah, because we all suck at something. Go for it.
How did you know when it was like the right time to exit for you and for your team?
Outside the money, when did I know it was the right time to exit? Well, so to be truthful, the first thing we did with MapQuest in 1999, I know you guys weren't born yet, but isn't that disappointing? They weren't born yet. Joe, what was happening in 1999 with internet companies? I picked on the guy who's like the lowest talker in the whole room, by the way. They were going public. Sorry, Joe. I did it. I said Joe. I didn't mean to. So all these internet companies were going public, even though they had like gargantuan losses, but it was cool. Like, so about a year before, when we decided, it takes, at that time, at least a year probably to get yourself set up. I was 35, sitting on the board. They're like, dude, we need adults. And, you got to understand, again, self-aware, right? You need people with gray hair. And so the first thing was taking it public, which isn't selling your company. You're just putting a whole bunch of money into the company. And then a year later, AOL bought it. So I wasn't, to be honest with you, I wasn't part of that decision. But if I answered a slightly different question, why did I stop taking an operating role? Why did I leave? I told you why I left the board, but I could have stayed in the company, I guess. I was bored. I was ready for something else. In fact, it wasn't a financial decision. It was a mental sanity. I needed to do something new. So I learned how to be a venture capitalist because I like to do new things. That's me being aware of who I am and what I'm good at. Yes, ma'am.
Since we've had kind of a development in the entrepreneurial studies program in the U.S. for the last 20 years or so, how are you seeing that impact communities and vice versa with startups?
Yeah, so entrepreneurship's hot right now, very trendy. Tall gentleman, blue shirt, tan, what's your name? I know we met.
Jeff.
Jeff, did you go to college?
I did.
Did you go here?
I did.
Did you know what an entrepreneur was when you left college?
Had an idea.
I didn't. Never heard of the word, didn't know you could start your own company, didn't even know it was a thing. Juxtaposed to today, you guys all know, right? It's become kind of hot, sexy. So there's a lot of stuff around to learn entrepreneurship. I think universities having entrepreneurship classes are fantastic. I don't know about the program or the classes specifically here. I know a little bit about what's going on here. I will tell you, most universities, well, not many today, they're getting better, don't do it the way I think they should do it. The way you should do it is the only way to learn entrepreneurship is to actually start something. Dive into the pool, learn how to swim. Now, that's not saying don't take an entrepreneurship class. That kind of maybe gets you the language and maybe some mindset. And there's some good programs, Jeff Savage, Dirk Brown, right? There's some people that run some good stuff here. However, that's not all that you need. You need so much more. So, for instance, anybody want a decently paying job when you leave college? Especially Jeff in the back, when you leave, do you want to? So, by the way, another reason to come here? Don't have your own idea yet? Great. But I tell people, go work for a startup. Go get paid crap, but work for a startup. 8, 10-person team, you're going to see everything. None of it's your responsibility, but you get to watch and see what happens. Set yourself up for that. So, long-winded answer to your question. Yeah, take some entrepreneurship classes, great. Get involved as an intern or potential employee, go work in a small company, watch to see what happens, see the bad things, see the good things, get those experiences. Maybe you turn out that you'll start something one day, fantastic. That's what's happening all over the place. Good question. One of my favorite, I've taught a class at UNC Chapel Hill a couple times, and one of my friends, who's a long-time entrepreneur, teaches an entrepreneurship class. Very little book work. There's no real good books on this stuff. But the first thing you need to do is go out and interview like 10 retail businesses to understand why they started, what's working, what's not working, so you can kind of see it live. I love that exercise he does in the first 2 weeks. Yes, sir.
What are the best ways to take advantage of the community in Columbia through this?
Show up. Just show up. Doesn't cost you anything. You just gotta show up. I know, we got a class here, and you guys ladies are on the younger side. I get that. I get that maybe it could be a little intimidating. I can tell you, there's nothing more inviting, and nothing more what's the word? Inviting, I guess is the word I'm looking for, than an entrepreneurial group. All those people that are 5, 10, 15 years, all were you at some point. All were trying to figure out who they are, trying to figure out what they're interested in. They are all helped by mentors and advisors, and so they're all willing to pay it forward and share with you their experience. And by the way, that doesn't mean you have to be an old guy or an old woman that's been through it for 25 years. Someone that's 2 years ahead of you can still share fantastic advice and mentorship. So, like I said, we have Tech Beans every Wednesday here in the front bar that you walk through. Free coffee. Maybe we'll have someone talk for 5 minutes. It's usually about an hour and 10 minutes. Show up, don't show up. I say show up. And just meet some people. Be willing to shake someone's hand and say, LJ? Hey LJ, I'm Chris. Great, nice to meet you. What do you study? Like, just be a little curious and like go and do a good party. Yes, sir.
Did you have IP that you had to deal with associated with your startups?
So Brad asked if I had IP, which is code for intellectual property. In other words, maybe something I needed to patent or trademark and stuff like that. And the answer was no. The answer was no. So here's a little hidden secret. Not hidden, but like a little funny. So can you imagine how much data you need for every road in the United States to go from address to address? Like, it's a lot of data. That's a technical term, data. So here's the thing, we didn't build any of the data. There was already 2 companies that had spent about $1 billion each building that street level database, and they were building it for all the car companies. Now what I'm going to tell you is they had been building it for about 10 years, even though the cars didn't have the nav systems that we all have today. So they were waiting for that to happen. So I walked in one day and I said, you know, we'd like to use your data for this thing called the internet. They're like, what's the internet? I'm like, you know, we're just gonna, you know, we don't know if it'll work. I think we paid like 1/100 of a penny per map, like when you made a direction. They got smarter later on. But gather the assets that are closest to you. I didn't have to go make that database. It would have, we couldn't have gotten there. We're a bunch of, you know, map geeks in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. But I went to both of these guys and said, hey, can I license your data? Google did the same thing when they started Google Maps for many years. But who has seen a Google car? You ever seen a Google car around town? That's how they went out and drove the cars with video and GPSs and built their own data set. Apple's now done the same thing. But we had no IP. The only IP you could have had was around the algorithm that determines what's the best route between two places. But I didn't think that was worth. I'm not a big patent your stuff person. I'm like, just go win the market. That'll be good enough. Yes, Ben.
So all of your...
I'm not getting tired yet, so keep going.
Of all your business experiences, which seem like a lot, what's been the most personally rewarding?
What's been the most personally rewarding of all the things I've done? It's doing this stuff. It's first of all, it kind of checks my I'm learning, and no one knows. Like there's not a lot of experts / science around how startup communities build and prosper. So I get to go figure that out. So check that box. The second thing is I'll sit down with any one of you and we can talk about your idea. And that'll be helpful, and that feels good. I do open office hours every week. You guys can sign up on my website, heivly.com, and you'll get 20 minutes, and we'll talk about whatever you want to talk about. And hopefully I'll help you. That feels good, 5 to 8 of those a week I do. But imagine helping to build a community where I help hundreds of you with my actions. That feels really impactful. So that's what I'm really enjoying today a lot. Yes, sir.
Rob, I'm sales class here, professional selling, and I would just like to ask you if you could expand on the role of sales in the commercialization of your startup, and especially, you mentioned it earlier, but a little bit more of the customer interface and how that affected your sales processes.
Yeah, so the question is the role of sales and what's that mean for a startup. And so I frequently tell an entrepreneur that your idea is crap until someone reaches into their pocket, pulls $1 out, and pays you for it. Like that's the true expression of value, right? So I told a little story earlier about maybe if you're, you know, an introverted software developer person, not comfortable about talking to people. Well, to me that's going to be instant failure unless you figure out how to get around that. And I went out for a year and I just tried to sell our enterprise products. I hated that feeling like of having a bag and selling what's in the bag. I'm more, in a maybe a classic sense, I consider myself more of a business development guy who can kind of, you know, merge your problems with my potential solutions and find a custom example. But anybody sell anything today? Yeah, of course you did, Megan. Everyone's got to learn how to sell. Yes, sir, in the back, the really cool jacket and the tie. And
Sorry, no, it's not me raising my hand. No.
Yeah, well, you don't have a tie, so you're safe.
I just wanted to know what from where you started to where you got now, what was your like self-driving factor that made you keep going? Because I'm sure you had failures on the way.
So the question is kind of what drives me, what keeps me going. I told you I got the energy of a 30, 40-year-old. I love business. I love this stuff. I love figuring stuff out. I was telling someone a story that I was riding in a car with my son-in-law, my daughter, my wife a year or two ago, and he was struggling with his job and kind of bitching a little bit about it. And he said, you know, what have you done when you've been in these situations? I said, I've never been in these situations. I literally loved every job I've had. Yeah, they get frustrating, but especially the last 20 to 25 years, I create the vehicle from which I'm doing. So I have nothing to complain about, right? I made these choices. But I have this energy and this drive, like I can't wait to push the boulder up the hill like 3 more feet. And I get my energy out of that. So, I know, I'm probably weird, but thanks for asking that question. Why, yeah. God, if you're not excited about what you're waking up for, maybe we need to change what you're waking up for. All right, we're getting near the end. There's got to be one really good question left. Should I call on somebody? Hannah, who's sitting next to you?
Maddie.
Hi, Maddie. Don't you hate this?
Yeah.
I warned you, didn't I, though?
Yeah.
Fair warning. What are you curious about, man?
This doesn't really have to do anything with your startup, but I'm mostly curious why geography?
Yeah, why geography? I kind of have a little bit of an idea, but I don't know why. So, when back in my day, back in the old days, when you went from middle school or junior high to senior high, did anybody remember they also took you on a tour of like what we call a vocational technical, like to learn how to be like a mechanic or something? So I remember doing this tour, and when I looked at like a group doing like architecture, I thought that is really cool. And I kind of think that maps are like house schematics. I think there's some very similar spatial is the word we use in geography. There's a spatial thing that I like and understand. And then I have an uncle, he's since passed, but my dad's younger brother, there's a lot of years, so my uncle was closer to my age, I think, than his. But he had gotten an undergraduate and a master's degree in geography and was working on his PhD when I started to become an adult. So he was always talking about the stuff he was doing, and I thought that sounded pretty cool. Like, if you know, I'm just going to go old for a second. Like, I still like opening up paper maps and looking at them. Like, there's something out of that you don't get out of the phone. Are you with me, Jeff?
Sure.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
If you have to figure out how to get from here to New York City, what do you use?
Google Maps. Well, if I'm driving, I use Waze. I think Waze is brilliant. But if I want to know, like, I drove here from Durham as opposed to my house that's closer to Charlotte. I didn't know actually what the right route was, so I ran it on Google Maps just so I knew that it was 3.5 hours and when I should leave. But then when I got in the car, I used Waze. Why wouldn't you, right? You need to know where the cops and the accidents are. 4 times in my life making huge road trips, Waze has said, get off now because there's, bad stuff ahead. Yes, Hannah.
What's your favorite place you've ever lived or traveled to since you're living?
Favorite place? Obviously Columbia, South Carolina. Though I've been enjoying myself here. I've been coming down again for 3 years now. Favorite place? St. John's in the Virgin Islands. Anybody from New Jersey here? All right, so I'm sorry, especially Professor Guy. So I'm from Philadelphia. So what I love about St. John's is you cannot fly into it. You have to fly into St. Thomas and take a ferry, which I say keeps out all the, the wackos from Jersey. But it's just that one little piece of friction just makes it like you gotta want to be there. That's my favorite place. The Greek islands are pretty cool too. Good question. Now that you open up like the personal, non-business stuff, yeah.
So this may be a heavier question, but you mentioned fear earlier. Are there any things, like early on, obviously you had a lot you were dealing with trying to get MapQuest built, but now, further into your career, what's an example of some big fear that's on your radar or something that brings you a lot of hope if you want to end on a happier note?
Looking stupid. Don't we all kind of fear that a little bit? Or wasting my time on something that to others might be stupid. That's usually the overriding thing. It's this, whatever that is, ego, some mixed up recipe of stuff. And I share that with you, and it is a little heavy, because the reason I want to share that with you is it doesn't matter who you are. Like, don't think you're unique if you have some of these fears. Like, you're not unique. Everyone has them. So the question is, how are you going to break out of those? So the hope is that you can break out, and it's a muscle that you get better at the more you do it, and that combined with that little idea of like laughing at it, going, just don't pay attention to it. It's just thing that you can't control. It's like, but isolate it. Those combination of those things, I think, are what should give you all hope, and knowing that you're not alone, and using other people. So remember, back to Build a Fort Lesson 1, go and socialize your idea with as many people as possible without fear or inhibition. It's an amazing thing when you go to talk to 15 people about your idea. The feedback you get that makes it smarter and better and gets you smarter also starts to say, well, I'm not a wacko. Like, people are starting to nod their head in the right direction. So that's why we do that.
When you're writing and trying to communicate your ideas, at what point do you know that the people that you're writing to can effectively understand what you're saying?
I have no clue whether they understand what I'm saying, but I'm confident that I do. So I've done this probably 1,000 times in the last 15 years. I have written 275 articles for Inc. magazine. I have probably 400 blog posts on my website. I've now written 2 books, equivalent of probably about 450 pages of stuff and probably 100,000 words. At this point, I kind of know that I'm good at it, and I know there's confidence in that. By the way, when I'm writing, I'm like, God, this is a trash one. And then invariably someone goes, that was pretty good. That was my favorite you've had in the last couple months. And so, like, you just gotta listen to people and trust yourself. For me, my secret sauce is trying to simplify complex things. I do it for me, so if I've done it for me, I know I can share it with you. So it's written for, like, you know, it's a simple brain writing for simple people. One more question and then we're done. Is it a good one? It's the best you can do. Great answer.
Out of all the characteristics you consider, out of all the characteristics you need to have as an entrepreneur, what would you consider to be the most important?
Let me see if I heard you right. Of all the characteristics related to entrepreneurship, what would be maybe 1 or 2 of those characteristics that I think are critical? A really good sense of curiosity and a healthy sense of self-awareness. Being able to kind of look yourself in the mirror and go, I'm not good at this, I'm good at that. But being curious. I love curious people. I love sitting down and learning what you're jamming on. All right, we'll call it a night. Thank you all for coming, especially those who were that weren't forced to come here. Thanks for listening. And by the way, Heivly, Heivly.com. Go to my contact bus if you want to sit and talk for 20 minutes. We'll talk whatever you want to talk about. I don't offer it if I didn't mean it, so I mean it. This is what I do. And I look forward to talking to a few of you. And thanks for listening tonight and joining this first in a series. And thanks, Rory, for having me.